Hello and welcome back to Digital Leader 2020 Virtual Summit. I'm Mark Stephen. I'm going to be chairing this afternoon's session. What we're going to be looking at here is leadership and innovation, discussing how you continue to plan when basically there's so many unknowns, there's so many uncertainties, and how you develop a strategy that will guide organizations beyond the current crisis. Our first speaker, and before we actually get to him, I should remind you, you can actually at any stage submit questions at the bottom of your screen. There's a button down there, which will allow you, and if you want to target them at a particular speaker, then fine, but that's where it happens. After we've heard all three speakers, we will have a Q&A session, which will take us to the end of the day. But our first speaker is Ritchie, who's Vice President of IT, Menzies International. And appropriately enough, the title of his talk is Leading Beyond the Crisis. So, Stephen.
Mark, thanks for the introduction. And thanks also to Ray, Pete, Hannah, and the team at Digit for putting on the event. I think it's been really good so far this morning for the sessions I've been able to get to. So thanks, Ray. I know it's a lot of effort to do an event like this and put it onto a new platform that we're working with today. So thanks for that. I'm sure it's a feeling expressed by all the delegates. AMI is probably a company a lot of you have not heard of. We're actually part of the John Menzies PLC group, which most of you will have heard of, either through the legacy business where we had newsagents and Menzies distribution, or the current focus of the business, which is on airport ground handling, refueling planes, cargo handling, and so on. So AMI is part of that cargo team in Menzies. We've got operations in Asia, in the Americas, in Europe and Africa, and we're basically serving key trade lanes globally. So we fly freight between point A to point B, and we use airline capacity to do that. So we're resellers for the airlines, or rather working with the airlines. So it's fast-moving goods that we're dealing with. We're either operating on or near the airport, and we're really prioritizing convenience for the customer by combining the transportation service with near airport drop-off, so they don't get tied up in all the queues at the airport, and also with other services such as cargo screening, warehousing, customs clearances, anything you can think about moving goods from A to B, we tend to be involved in it. We also deal with specialist cargo, and we will run our own consolidation, so we'll consolidate from multiple forwarders and then on forward those goods to destination as an export. So as a wholesaler, we've got deep relationships with both our customers and our suppliers, which is a really attractive proposition from a technology point of view and a really interesting challenge in terms of how we connect across that supply chain and become a really core part of that. At the moment, we are undergoing a couple of major IT transformations. So the company has grown over the last 30 or so years, basically through acquisition in different markets. And through those acquisitions, all the IT platforms have been left alone, basically, and every region has run their own IT system. So I joined the company about 2 years ago. In fact, I think it was 2 years ago today, in fact, 2nd of July. And we're going through a transformation to move to that single platform now globally, which is a really exciting project. First time that the business will do things in a consistent way on a consistent platform. And really what we're trying to do is drive a consistent customer experience to build on our kind of physical on-the-ground presence, but doing that digitally as well. And then deepening those digital connections as well, which I'll come on to speak to later. So it's just a little bit about AMI just to get started, but I think it's probably worthwhile just reflecting, if we haven't already done that enough today, just on COVID-19 and what that has meant for the business and what I've been spending my time doing, and me and my team have been doing with the business. So we've had a long time now focused on making sure that we've got business continuity in place. We ended up with a scattered workforce with people working from home, some people still in the office, and then others, unfortunately, being placed on the furlough schemes and so on. And we have different needs to service all these different types of employees in this time. So we've spent a lot of time fulfilling those requirements. And, we heard a bit this morning about those different ways of working, so I don't necessarily need to cover those again for you. But once this hump was cleared, it really became clear what was happening in the market. And that was where we realized there was a big change down in the supply. We've all heard about the flights that have been cancelled or severely reduced. And a lot of the cargo that we move flies in the underbelly of the planes that we would all fly on normally. And that capacity is just not there at the moment. So we had quite a significant number of cancellations in our standing capacity agreements with airlines. There were lots of repatriation flights, which kind of kept some capacity in the market. But ultimately, within AMI, we actually ended up chartering some of our own aircraft for the first time in our history. And that's really in response to that capacity constraint. We were seeing schedule changes by the hour. So we were seeing on-the-spot flight cancellations, which saw a massive increase in our rebooking processes. And as the demand reduced kind of quite critically, and then over time it's reduced still further, backlogs have been driving up because a lot of places are still manufacturing, but they're just not able to ship. And so our shippers, our forwarders, are being forced to decide, do I pay the high rates or do I delay my shipment? So the market dynamics have changed quite significantly. And so how do you lead when you're faced with that type of dramatic market shift? So the first thing that we did is we made sure that we were part of the discussion with the management. So we opened lines of communication. We started to meet with the regional teams, the operational teams, and the sales teams much more regularly. And meeting with the sales teams was critical for us because we needed to be ahead of the curve as the product changed. And we needed to understand what our carriers were going to change, what our customer demands were going to change, and how we were going to then position the product back to the market and how we were going to sell it. So that was a really important thing to be part of. Being at the table and being part of those discussions and being part of those decisions was really important. So could our systems service the charter? Could our systems cope with an increase in rebookings, which effectively you're doubling your transaction rate, if you like? We had some carriers introducing emergency surcharges that we also had to implement quite quickly. And then, of course, the significant shift away from the predefined tariffs, because everything then became a quote for capacity that was available in the market. That was a real challenge in terms of our quoting system being able to keep up. And a lot of our people changed from being booking people to being quoting people. So you're having to retrain your workforce at that stage. So that engagement with operations and sales leaders, listening to what's changing, not even directly, just indirectly, kind of listening and reading between the lines to what's going on, was really important for me and my team to be part of that. We also undertook some targeted technology insourcing. So we looked at the risk profile of some of our supply chain, our technology supply chain providers. We made the choice to insource some of those activities because we couldn't really guarantee that the single provider providing that single system was going to be able to operate in the lockdown environment or even survive potentially. So we have insourced quite a bit of capability. And that's been a pressure on the team. And I think looking after your team's well-being in that state to make sure that we are caring for our employees is really important. I think we touched on that this morning as well in some of the sessions. We also chose to protect the integrity of our core operating systems. So we decided to make as few changes as possible. We make the changes that we need to make to service the current business. But any other changes are really optional at this stage because we want to reduce the number of requests, number of things we're changing in the system so that we're not introducing additional risks to the platform while our own teams are on lockdown and maybe aren't able to operate. That was more, I guess, on the front end of the crisis. I think the third thing we did was we continued to position for investment. We had the option to put initiatives on hold, but we decided really to use the downtime to improve capability so that we were better positioned for the recovery. And that was a really important decision for me and the leadership team to make, that we would continue with some of our committed projects to reduce risk, to drive cost out, and to improve capability for the recovery and really being ready was what we had in mind there. So during the lockdown, we've actually probably deployed more capability in the last 2 months than we have in perhaps the last year. And I think that just shows the pace of really what's required, which maybe goes against what I said about reducing risk through making changes to the environment. But I think when you do these things in a controlled way, you can make that work. So we've managed to deploy a new cloud-based voice platform in one of our facilities, and another one will go live next week. The purpose of doing that was really to reduce risk in our environment, because we have a supplier who is not able or has best efforts support for one of our voice systems, and we needed to move forward with a commitment that we'd made there. We also decided to move forward with one of our new operating system launches in our Netherlands operation, and that really required us to look at the change management plan. We can't get to the Netherlands to provide the on-site support that we normally would, and so we had to have a different virtual support approach to things, which is, I guess, just reacting like the rest of the business does, but it's an important consideration to make. And we've also been able to achieve cost reduction by looking at a lot of our integrations with customers is via EDI, and the exchange of manifests between us and our customers. We've been able to re-engineer that solution, and then during lockdown, again, we actually reduced our costs by 99% by moving that from quite an old platform, a kind of dedicated EDI platform, to an Azure solution, which is actually positioned as much more with a scalable solution for the recovery, which we're quite excited about. And I think this goes back to something that Kate Forbes said in her introduction this morning. It's about finding opportunities at this challenging time. I think she closed out her remarks by saying that. And I think that's really important, is that we do look for the opportunities when we have these challenges. I'm sure that this challenge of COVID is going to actually spawn more challenges down the line, and we need to be looking for those. We need to be ready to respond in similar ways to this. I think the final thing that we've done in AMI is we're starting to look now at the leading indicators. So we're starting to look at rating data to see when the rates for the airlines is going to start to come down. What happened at the beginning of the crisis, we first saw this in China as a leading indicator, where the COVID outbreak there, the rates shot up 4x. And those have come back down in China. They're still to come back down in most of the rest of the world, although we're starting to see that trend happening now. So I think identifying the right points of data for your business and understanding how to react to those is quite important. We're also looking, in addition to the rate data, at schedule and capacity data, which is quite insightful. So I think, investing that time to identify trends in your own industry that can then help you inform the business as to what's going on and where the opportunities may be, and giving the business that data, and almost self-serving to that extent. So a bit about me. I spent 15 years in oil and gas prior to joining the freight forwarding world. I'm now 2 years into the logistics space. But in that 13 years I spent in oil and gas, it was heavily project-based and heavily driven, and I learned a lot in that space around PM and strategic planning, about building the ability to understand the business and then apply technology to achieve a solid business outcome. And that really was a kind of solid people, process, technology environment that probably most of us are used to. In the last couple of years of my time at Baker Hughes in oil and gas, merged with GE and became Baker Hughes GE. And then there was kind of this shift that GE brought, which was in the digital space, which was really interesting. That really brought the physical. So we looked a lot at connected factories, connected products, sensing and analytics and digital modeling of 3D modeling of kit, so you could understand what was going on. That was a really interesting time. And that whole focus on the physical kind of came with a focus on the product. And that was a really important shift. That was a really important shift in my mind around how we approach technology as product, and how we put product in place. So at AMI, one of my first hires was a head of product, and she came into the team and has really steered a lot of our thinking on how we approach problems and how we productize our offerings to our customers. And so I guess the next thing we've done as part of our COVID journey is we've really crystallized our product strategy, our digital strategy, if you like, that we're going to bring to market. AMI has a number of customer-facing platforms today, but the way those have been managed is not as a product. They've been very project-led initiatives. The project's been done, and the team have dropped it and then moved on to the next project, and then that product lifecycle has never really been managed. And so I think that's been a key thing that I've brought to the table, to the leadership discussions that we have in AMI, is thinking about the product, thinking about that customer experience and how the product leads that. And in our business to business model, AMI being the wholesaler in the middle there, we're working with carriers on the one hand and with forwarders on the other, business to business. That's a key prospect in how we more deeply integrate our products with our carriers and more deeply integrate with our customers, so we secure we secure more of the market, more of the business from them. So that's been another key shift in our approach. So that strategy is now with our chief executive and our CFO to go to the board for the approvals there, which has been a great achievement over the last few months. I think just in terms of how that strategy gets put together, I'm asked that quite a lot, is how do you do a strategy? And in forums like this and the kind of one-to-ones I have with coaching people. And really it's looking at understanding market trends, it's looking at business objectives, it's looking at competitors and threats and the risks that an organization faces. But I think it's also about reimagining what your business could look like in the digital age. And that's really where we've started with the strategy that we've just put together. We haven't started with necessarily the objectives that the business has today with a 3-year plan that we have. It doesn't really start with what our competitors are doing today. It doesn't even really start with the assets that we have today. It starts with a reimagining of the product that the customer needs for the future. So we've spent quite a lot of time personifying our customers and understanding what our customer needs are and how those different personas could interact with us. Because in the forwarding world, you've got very large companies, and then you've got very, very small companies, and you've got individuals who are acting as forwarders. And they all have different requirements, and they all have different technical ability to connect or not connect with us, or integrate with us, I should say. And so some of our customers are going to require an application, some of our customers are going to require an integration. And that's been a key thing, is to identify those personas, understand what they need, and then understand how we could provide products that will fit their needs. So we've kind of made that shift in terms of understanding our customer, putting the products in place or defining the products, and now we'll put the team in place to deliver those and look to the technology. So without saying any buzzwords like cloud first or mobile first, we've defined our strategy to meet the needs of our customers and how can we best connect with them. Focusing on the customer, I think, is probably the most important thing that we could do at this time. So I think with that, I'll just thank you for your time, and I'll hand it back over to Mark.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think Mark was maybe muted there. So, and thank you, Stephen. It was a fascinating presentation on what you were doing across at across at AMI. So fantastic. I'm the Director of Digital and CISO at NHS, NSS. So we're actually one of the special health boards that sits within the NHS. We do a wide and variety of things across the NHS, providing services to, for example, some of our own organisations, things you'll know, such as the National Blood Transfusion Service, and then we provide services to other organisations as well within the NHS, so some of the health boards and some of the other services as well. And we also provide quite a lot of services across local authorities, etc. as well. Stretches quite wide and varied, the work we do, so we do a lot of work around infrastructure. We've got a national security team, security and information governance, and we've got a large team that manages national programmes and things like data and business intelligence. I've been in the role now, it'll be coming up for 2 years in August, and before that I actually worked in the oil and gas sector as well, just similar to what Stephen said, but I was working in a company called Wood Mackenzie in Edinburgh, working in large data and analytics and commercial energy markets, so quite interesting. So I'm going to take you through a wee journey on what I think is important for leadership working in a crisis, and in particular try and highlight what I think some of the crisis trends are, what some of the crisis themes are, etc. that I think are relevant. So that's my tagline there, saying leaders don't crisis manage. I think they innovate, which is absolutely fine. Okay, starting with some leadership qualities, I've brought 4 political leaders out here. Deliberately stayed away from the political leadership within the UK in doing this, and but I've certainly brought 4 leaders that I certainly look up to, and I'll quickly tell you what some of the qualities are that I see them having. The first one in the top left, an empathetic leader. That's actually Prime Minister Ardern from New Zealand, and somebody that I think has got a fantastic leadership style, leading probably with empathy in a crisis. Things like she's done changing gun laws very quickly in response to Christchurch shooting. She's somebody that doesn't just talk about making change, but makes that change and makes it very quick. Somebody that's known for openness and honesty. And some of the digital technologies that they've used during the coronavirus crisis have been quite fascinating to watch. They've come out of lockdown, and they've got a lot of QR technology, QR coding technology they use for actually tracking people when they're going to restaurants, pubs, etc., which might be where we end up in a few weeks' time, I suspect. And next to Ardern, we have got Prime Minister Marin that's from Finland. A leadership strength I think she's got is bringing parties together, bringing people together. She leads a coalition of 4 different leaders in Finland, and has actually got a senior team there that's made up predominantly of females, which provides, I think, quite a unique context in the way she does things. Very much known for human-centred decisions. Going down the way, it's Chancellor Angela Merkel from Germany, of course. And one of the fascinating things when I was researching this, I learned, is that she's got a scientific background, and there's no doubts that Germany haven't suffered like some other countries to do with the COVID crisis, because she's heavily learned on data and that science in order to understand how she should be actually leading during that. Very rational, quite an emotional person, and somebody who's got a direct appeal to the notion of social togetherness, which I think comes through when she's doing things. And then lastly on that screen, we've got the president of Taiwan, that's Tsai Ing-wen, and she's got an amazing approval rating during the COVID crisis of 70.3%. And not just that, but Taiwan's a country where they're actually expecting 2% GDP growth during this year as well, despite the crisis. And they were able to actually be minimally impacted by the crisis, to the point that they were actually donating 17 million surgical masks across Europe and the US, etc. When we were all trying to get that PPE equipment that was in short demand, they were actually in a position where they were actually saying, we can actually provide that and give that to you. And obviously she's doing a lot of work at the moment, which is stressing how Taiwan is absolutely independent from what's happening across in China, and the Chinese leadership. I think a great leader. Again, staying on the political things, we've got 4 other leaders here. Some have got, I think, different types of leadership qualities. We've got President Trump, very successful businessman, strong leader. You couldn't say anything else about him. Very task-oriented in his approach. You could say autocratic in some of what he does as well. He seems to thrive in conflict, which is quite interesting. And I think what you see from the way he leads to quite a lot of leaks coming out of the government, high turnover in administration, and quite a few loyalty and trust type issues, which is different to some of the leaders on the previous screen. Alongside Mr. Trump, we have got the president of Brazil, that's Jair Bolsonaro, and quite interestingly, he was leading the sort of coronavirus denial movement when this all happened, and has got a popularity of 30% in Brazil. Again, lots of resignations within the government, very much a lack of national unity, and likes to suppress bad news, suppress information on the spread of coronavirus. So again, somebody who's very, very much autocratic. Down in the left, we have got the Turkish president, that's Recep Erdogan. Again, a political giant, I would suggest. 4 elections he's won in a row. However, the Turkish economy has actually deteriorated well before COVID. High inflation, high unemployment, and similar to Brazil, silences of critics. Total lack of empathy in the way that he manages. And then, of course, President Putin sitting alongside him as well. Cronyism, corruption, large scale. Someone else that repression of opponents, free speech, aggression, intolerance, and trust issues. Now, if you're comparing that to some of the digital leaders that certainly I look up to and aspire to work to be like, top left, we've got Jeff Bezos from Amazon. He's got some fantastic leadership traits. He's always thinking bigger, wants to always think bigger. What's the next big thing? Huge standards, high standards. He's got a team that aspire to try and work to these standards at the same level as he does. Conviction about the long term. It's all about the long term with him. He's quite happy to play the long term game. You saw that when he launched the Amazon online book in 1994, which obviously has become that world-leading brand. But at the time, he had that vision to be much bigger than an online seller of books. I think as well as a long-term vision comes patience as well, in order to actually know that things will happen. And what I believe with Jeff as well, he's an amazing learner, somebody who's always wanting to learn, somebody who's always wanting to know what the next best thing. Sitting alongside Jeff, we have got Elon Musk. So Elon's obviously founder and owner of Tesla and SpaceX, and apparently Robert Downey Jr. based a lot of his Iron Man characteristics on Elon Musk as a role model, which is quite interesting as well. Very much an entrepreneurial spirit, innovation, energy, strategic direction, integrity, and very much somebody who also learns from failure. His first 3 SpaceX launches were a failure, and as we all know, within the last couple of months, he's actually managed to get the spaceship up docked with the International Space Station, and he's got a very, very simple mission to put people on Mars. It's a great mission to have. Bottom left underneath, we've got Microsoft CEO, that's Satya Nadella, very much somebody that's come in and changed that organisation for the better. It was an organisation that had very much, as far as I saw it, lost its way. Amazon were pioneering cloud computing, and Microsoft were still pushing out licensings in desktop and servers, etc. And he's brought in a whole lot of leadership principles based on clarity, energy, delivery success, and they've undergone a total transformation underneath them with products like Office 365 and Microsoft Teams, showing how they're actually leading the way in that space. And then a big move into the cloud with Azure and endpoint security. So very much a company that's very much on the up again. And then the bottom right-hand corner is founder and former CEO of Alibaba. That's Jack Ma, the richest man in China. And created this organisation. A lot of people call it China's equivalent to Amazon. Very, very customer-centric, and are driven to actually succeed, and very much to unite around them. And they've got 44% annualised top-line growth over the last 5 years. So fascinating leaders. We talked about opportunities earlier. I know it was mentioned this morning as well, and this is just a slide from McKinsey. They do a lot of this research. This is from April 2020, and what you can see there is that executives do see that COVID crisis can be a big opportunity for growth in their industry, and it's not surprising that the technology pillar sitting there on the right-hand side, round about that, higher than 80%, and then industrial sitting across at just below 40%, and then others sitting in the middle, such as where where I am in healthcare sitting is 70%. But, a crisis is all about seeing this as an opportunity as to how you're going to do things different, what you can actually start to do, what your competitors are doing, not sitting and being too patient around what you do, but being able to respond. And that's from that fascinating survey that McKinsey did when they got to there. So, as my talk's about leading uncertain times, I'm going to go into some of the bullets as to what I think is important, how I lead in uncertain times, and how some of these the great digital leaders in a couple of slides ago, I think, managed to actually turn their organisations around in uncertain times as well. The first thing I would always do in an uncertain time is re-emphasise your purpose, what you're actually here to do. Understand what your mission is. Elon Musk's mission is to put people on Mars, so definitely understand what that mission is and make sure that's clearly communicated so that everyone within the organisation understands what that mission is as well. So that's things like the guiding principles, how you're actually going to work, how you're actually going to deliver that mission and that purpose, and instill confidence in everything that you're doing. Your workforce in a crisis needs to know you're there, you're leading, you're making these necessary changes, and you're able to actually pivot when you're being asked to do. It's important to be able to do that. Reconfirm, prioritise values in a crisis is absolutely essential. Stephen mentioned the workforce and being able to actually caring for the workforce, looking after the workforce's well-being. That's essential as well when you're actually looking at leading. You want to reaffirm the organisation's values, and in so doing, you'll bring the workforce with you. And define the non-negotiables as well. Things that there may be things that you say you can stop doing. There may well be things that you say you can't. They're non-negotiable. You just have to get on and get doing them. Prioritising resilience. Obviously, in a crisis, you want to make sure that you're that organisation that's able to come out of the crisis actually, hopefully, in at least as good a shape, preferably in a better shape than where you went into it. So, again, looking at that, assess the working practices and adjust. We've all done that. It was talked on this morning, working disparately, a lot more people working from home with communication and collaboration skills, Zoom, Teams, etc., and making these adjustments so that you can actually get on and still continue to deliver during that. Establishing a command centre as well is essential in a crisis. We need to be able to actually know what we do when we've got issues. Where does it go? Where do we go for decisions? So that's absolutely something that's absolutely essential. We've done that within health and done that within Scottish Government. We've actually got a command centre that's got a gold, silver, bronze crisis now that we can actually escalate things up to and ensure that we get prioritisation and investment where we need it and when we need it. And business continuity is absolutely essential as well. Any crisis, you need to go in there with your business continuity plans being up to date, rehearsed, and being things that you can actually lean upon. On the next slide, delegating autonomy. It's certainly you need a strong team. You cannot be doing all this as a leader yourself. You need to understand who's in your leadership team and give them space to go and actually succeed. Make sure they can escalate up when things are not going well, but give them space to take things on, own things, and deliver them. Supply chain. We very much got hit in the health service, whereby there was a shortage of PPE. And like a lot of organisations, we're heavily reliant on Asia in order to get PPE into the organisation. So what we had to do was to get a lot of that supplies back into the country, which very much became a bidding war between who was paying most for PPE. But very much the priority going forward will be to say we need to have a balanced supply chain. We need to make sure we've got enough supply chain locally and within the United Kingdom as well as maybe some cheaper supply chain abroad. So supply chain is essential. Digital first approach with everything, and we've had some parts of the organisation that have been very slow in actually transforming and trying to jump upon digital, and the COVID pandemic very much forced them to actually have a different look at how they're actually trying to do things. For example, parts of the organisation, we pay dentists for people going and getting dental care, and we pay optometrists and prescriptions as well. So, and a lot of these things are not fully digitised yet, but very much this forced them to have a look at the process to make sure that they are. Aim for speed, not perfection. When you're in a crisis, you want to be able to move fast, do the right things. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I've got some case studies coming up where we've not done perfect things, but we've done things very quickly and be able to actually deliver success on the back of them. Capture operational structural changes. You might have to make some tweaks to the structural change or to how you operate during a crisis in order to come out the other side. And also embracing the long view. The crisis will be over. There'll be a recovery period after that. You need to come into it and fully mobilise. So do look on that longer picture. Don't just focus short term. Focusing short term means that you definitely have probably a competitive disadvantage in the marketplace. Pivoting strategy. So this is about the embracing the long view. This was a survey that was done by DMEXCO, again in April 2020 this year, and what they're saying is 70% of respondents expect that the pandemic will accelerate the pace of the digital transformation. We're certainly finding that in the NHS. It's all about now actually having a look at any inefficiencies and moving forward with how digital transformation can actually make us more effective, better, take cost out of the organisation, etc. And what's that going to be about? Pivoting the strategy, changing the operating model, how we work. In the NHS, we've very much moved into things like near me or attend anywhere, so we can do video consultations with GPs. We can do consultations between consultants. They can share X-rays using this technology. Now, that technology really wasn't used particularly well before we went into the pandemic, but there's been a forcing of actually using that technology. So how you operate is definitely something that's going to have to change. Socio-economic impact, there'll be definitely suppliers, etc., that are getting impacted on that. And how's that actually going to affect your financial outcomes, your financial envelopes, what you're working to, etc. We need to be looking at that as well as keeping an eye and focusing on the marketplace, what's happening in the marketplace, what's competitors doing, what's the data telling you that competitors are actually doing as well as what the supply chain is doing. And very much if you do that, you'll accelerate this digital transformation program and have a look at the opportunities. That's exactly what we want to do. A couple of things there as well. I think when you're looking at pivoting your strategy, it's important making sure we've got the right governance and security around what we're doing. In particular, as you try and take much more in the way of internet-facing services than maybe in Azure or AWS, it's making sure that these things are secured. And then invest in data and intelligence. I think data becomes even more important as we come out of this pandemic. What's data telling us? How do we know we're making the right decision? How do we know where we need to be investing, what we need to be changing? To be honest, it's all about data. I'm going to go through some case studies on things that we've been doing within the NHS, and hopefully you'll find these interesting. So if you remember, the PM announced the lockdown on the 23rd of March 2020. And very much overnight, there was an immediate transition to 100% in office, moving out of the office and working to remote working, where possible, unless it wasn't possible. Within NSS, we have quite a lot of the workforce that have got to be in the office. We have got the national blood team that and we've also got distribution as well for distributing medical supplies, PPE, etc. as well. So both the blood transfusion and that distribution centres need to come in, but a lot of the workforce was actually pivoting around to working from home, and it was quite interesting when we started doing this. I think a lot of the assumption was it would be easy to get the laptops, easy to have all the software on the laptops, and people would just plug these things in. Wasn't the case. There was a shortage of laptops, shortage of headsets for working remotely. Quite a lot of people just didn't have that capability. And what we did in NSS is we pivoted that around to say, okay, there's a couple of things we can do. One, because they weren't in the office, we could look to use technology. So if the manufacturers were able to actually distribute some of this hardware across direct to people's homes, we could use technology such as Microsoft's Intune in order to actually build these images remotely, so they don't have to come into the office. We can just get a distributor just to send the hardware right to source and get images built, which I think is a great thing to do. Other thing we pivoted and did as well is we looked at some of the technology in Azure and things like virtual desktops. So we've now got virtual desktop images, so we don't actually any longer have to send out laptops for people working remotely. We can actually just stream down an image and they can get access to all the corporate services they need and everything else across that way. If you're estimating what this made to the business, it probably made a difference of about £100,000 just with making these two small steps. They don't seem particularly big, but in order to actually reduce the build time, the time and cost for distribution, and the effort that's going into that as well, then that we think it's about £100,000 savings. And productivity, we know that there's definitely quite a lot of people that were able to work because we pivoted very quickly, that just weren't able to work in that way as well. One thing that I said in that screen as well is that we've got a lot of legacy applications, Windows 7, and I strongly said that we weren't actually sending out Windows 7 desktops. So we had to find a way of making sure that these applications could run on Windows 10, which is where things like the virtual desktops were coming from. We can actually stream these applications down, but still give them a safe and secure working environment on the desktop. Case study 2, collaboration. So again, to do with the lockdown. So basically, how did we actually continue to work in the lockdown, given we've got a workforce of about just under 4,000, about 3,500. So very much a disparate working model now with remote working, information sharing, meeting attendance, and telephony and video conferencing. And we made a decision very, very quickly, which was we would actually roll out Microsoft Teams. We were actually in the middle of doing an Office 365 rollout anyway, but we hadn't intended that would be completed until September or October this year. But we basically had a look and say, what could we do to roll this out considerably earlier, and made a decision that we could actually take a few shortcuts. And this is back to what I was saying about don't have to be 100% correct. Take a few shortcuts where we just rolled out the Teams part of the Office 365 suite, and we enabled every member of staff within the NHS, not just NSS, to have an account with Teams so that they can all change the way they work and work remotely, and do it in such a way that it was safe. And how we did that through a combination of local authentication and also synced authentication into the Microsoft Azure cloud, which again wasn't what we intended to do, but we thought we can go to this halfway step, and then as we get through correcting the rollout, we can actually fix that as we go problem. And what this has given us, it's given us a secure and safe space for clinicians and business information sharing to take place. And we will be using this platform as well for things like group consultations as well with members of the public with clinicians and for GPs moving forwards. And this was done over a space of a couple of weeks. We went from not having Teams to having Teams rolled out to 150, 1,000 staff. So it was quite an amazing feat done by the team all remotely. Basically, since April, what does this actually mean for the use of Teams? Well, basically, we've got 35,000 Teams channels that are actively getting used across the NHS. Since April, we've had 250,000 calls made across Teams and 500,000 online meetings. We tend to spend most of our time on Teams at the moment, which is brilliant, and 2 million private chat messages. It has changed the way we work in the NHS. It's as simple as that. We don't work the way we did before. It's all totally different to how we did it before. A great use of the technology, and I think a great case study is what you can do when you need to move in a crisis. Okay, case study 3 is going to be looking at the test and protect, which I'm sure you've all seen. There was a drop of the brochures to the doors just last week on this actually. So First Minister announces Scotland's approach to implementing test and protect. This was test, trace and isolate back in 26th of May 2020. And quite an interesting programme to be working on. Lots of data. So I was fascinated because it took me back to my Wood Mackenzie data and analytics type work that I was doing. So we get all the COVID test result data coming in from 2 channels. It comes in from 14 laboratories across the NHS's territorial boards, which I'm sure you'll be using. And it also comes from UK government's private sector labs, of which the biggest one is the Lighthouse Lab, which is actually in Glasgow University. And since we started taking data in, 400,000 test results have come into the NSS, and that's about 270,000 via the NHS channel and 130,000 via the Lighthouse channel. And of that, there's about 25,000 positive tests that have come in. And what we're doing with that is we're actually feeding that data into a national and a local contact tracing service so that we can come out of lockdown, so we can actually try and get some sort of normality into our lives. Focus on this one's very much on delivery at speed, with the data telling us what we're doing and a long-term view. So when we were asked to get involved in this programme, I made quite a few quick decisions. One was, rather than just bring data in and push the data into a system, was to pull the data into a data warehouse so that we can actually start to slice and dice and do predictive analytics around that, modelling the R number, doing SEER models, which is the WHO model for how they manage pandemics, so we can actually understand what is the data starting to tell us. Now that puts us on the front foot in Scotland, there's no doubt about that, when some of the other home nations perhaps weren't in the same place. We also made a quick decision to not go along with the home nations. We were going down a route of doing something different different. And we rather than outsourcing a case management tool for doing our contacts, we trusted our internal team to actually using existing technology based on ServiceNow to build a case management system for doing the contact tracing, and set them a challenge of turning that around in 4 weeks rather than what we would normally do, which is a series of longer sprints. So very much an agile 4-week period, turn something around. And also to implement this into a full cloud telephony system, because the contact tracers that we're bringing into the service will be based from home. It's not a traditional contact centre. It's very much a disparate contact centre, and all powered by the power of the BI dashboarding that we're actually looking to do. And this is what we did, and the national service went live last Monday, which is fantastic. So this was a case study here, developed in ServiceNow, software as a service, basically 4 times 1 week sprints, automated all the test results coming in, integrated cloud telephony, lots of personal information and activity for each index case, and monitor and manage COVID-19 exposed areas for citizens. Fantastic case study. As I say, that's what's now using to get you all out of the lockdown that you're in. And lastly from me is basically just the BI that we've built on top of this, which is a huge series of highly intelligent predictive analytics around the pandemic that we're in. One of which is focusing on operational performance. So this is the effectiveness of the service that we're actually running, the contact tracing service. Another one is looking on the epidemiological reporting to identify any trends or changes in the movement of the growth of disease, which have both been highly effective. And as I say, without you actually knowing you're using that service, it went live on last Monday, and that's exactly what you're using. So once again, thanks very much for having me here. It's been an absolute pleasure. Great conference, and I look forward to taking part in the Q&As. Thank you very much.
Deryck, thank you very much for that. I'd just like to apologise to those of you who are bitterly disappointed that I seem to have found the microphone button again. You missed a real treat the last 10 rounds, one of the funniest jokes I've ever told in my life. Those of you who can lip read will know that that's a black lie, but never mind. You didn't miss much. Our next speaker, oh, and by the way, I should just point out one more time, if you've got a question for any of these 3 speakers, stick it down in the bottom section there, and we will get round to it fairly shortly. Our last speaker this afternoon is Elizabeth McNabb, former COO and CFO from the Linux Foundation. She's in San Francisco at the moment, and the title of her talk is Innovation During These Times. So, Elizabeth.
Good morning. Good afternoon. Cheers, that is. Thank you very much, Mark. And thanks to the Digit team. Fabulous job. And really, all of you out here as peers, I'm really excited to be with you. And so with innovation, I want to talk to you about my passion, which has always been to drive innovation and do that as each of you are as well. And in doing that, I've really honed that from working in data science in American Airlines in my 20s to, driving growth at AT&T to more recently in open source, which many of you are in open source or looking at it. And it is one big collaborative community. At the same time, as each of us have found during the virus and the COVID virus time period, to actually have full technology in everyone's hands and fully a remote virtual workforce working over the last 2 years at Linux Foundation, we really had to step up our game, not just to be fabulously collaborative in the environment, but also be that one-to-one and within teams. So drove a lot of change process there. And so as we are here as peers, I wanted to first take a poll with you and get a sense of what you're working on right now in innovation. And so with that, I'm going to pull up this survey. And what I'd like you to reflect on is that right now, or if you look at year to date, what's been your top focus on driving innovation? Pricing, new product or service, expansion, or partnering in M&A? And if you could think of your top one and click your results now, I am sending that survey out to you. I'm going to give you a minute now. Great, seeing a real strong tally, so let me close the result here in a couple of seconds. getting a few more in. So let me just close it in 5 more seconds. Excellent. So you can see the survey with me now, and what we can see is the most of us are expanding new markets or geographies, which is fabulous to see when you think about the lockdown and the changes that have been going on. Side by side with that, we have a nice mix of us across pricing, new products or services. We're using partnering and M&A as our primary place to go. So here we can see side by side what we're doing with innovation, and we can really link that to the talks that have been done by Deryck, Stephen, and myself. When I think about innovation, I'm going to talk about 5 areas. And the first one is around the area of act with empathy. And speakers spoke of that earlier today with you, and as we heard from Deryck, really looking at empathetic leaders. And so I think that we all know that, but at the same time, I think when I look across all of us in technology and all of us in innovation, we tend to lean forward. We lean in and we're driving at the next milestone. We're driving at the next mountain. And so even during this COVID time, we're trying to fix results, and a lot of our teams too. Yet at the same time, I think the importance is so high still to start each meeting, start each conversation with empathy first, and the center where the person is coming into it or where their family is around them, and then still, get to business and get business done. But I know for myself, I've had to work on that over the years, and really important for each of us to think of that now. Next to that, when I look at what I've been leading against, on the lower left corner is a picture from the Dinner Party. It's a nonprofit in the United States that has a community helping 20s and 30-year-olds handle grief. My advisory work around their data science and their digital is bringing them to life, as you can imagine, since they had face-to-face dinner parties up to now. And so they're moving to a virtual environment. And even number 2, expanding their offering. They're being asked to come inside of companies with employees and look at delivering the dinner party concept, which is how to deal with grief, not only for those with grief inside a company, but to also bridge the virus is causing a lot of crisis, grief of the old ways, and stress. And so a lot of change going on there, which is exciting. At the same time, with Juneteenth here in the United States and many places across the world, working against the time of crisis caused us all to look at the everyday lack of civility, lack of anti-race in our behaviors. And so when I look at this, I'm seeing groups here in San Francisco, where I am, here in the Bay Area, here across the US, and here across global reach in communities. I've got 3 different communities I'm working on to try to work on our daily practices and to drive to diversity of change, knowing that that too gets results, and it gets even greater results. So these are, a couple of examples of working with empathy. On the area of communication, really interesting to think about. Both Deryck and Stephen spoke to this, which is how critical communication is. And I know each of you are driving against that side by side during this time. And what I have really found is that communication was key, even with a strong technology at the Linux Foundation, for example, or with strong communication in the ability to have the technology at hand and have Zoom or Teams at hand. And that is that we had to really work at the Linux Foundation on really getting to a truly written down culture. And it took more than a year to get to a strong place, meaning that, yes, we have collaborative tools. Yes, we have a place of shared drive, but to actually have things written down on your role in a way that's transparent. When you think of some of our operations, it's so clear that you have a written down culture. People know what a job does. But when you look at many of the different jobs and roles, that which they do is not always written down and transparent to others. So I want to underline the idea of the written down culture that was mentioned. And then the second point I would make is that for me, when I worked with a coach a number of companies back, I came up with that coach a 30, 60, 90-day, one-page template the group here knows how to put a process together, how to put a visible process. But this really was a one-pager that included the 3 to 5 top strategic imperatives that I needed to accomplish milestones with my team or with peer teams. And that would include not only those things that were very process-driven and a clear diagram, but also things like culture, like innovation, and have those milestones be visible and show progress to it. Taking that in a written down way visibly, whether that be in an online visible or a piece of paper, was really important to keep showing it. And also, as mentioned, I work inside the boardroom as well. I'm on a media company board, on private tech boards. And what I know is that when it comes to talking to your executive suite, who's talking to the board or directly to the board in your role, that being able to show that 30, 60, 90 and show progress against it and continue to look at it is really important. And I found that that was the biggest transformation I had, to have people not only get my vision and be excited about it, but to also be able to actually know how to get to their steps to make sure that we reach that vision. The third point I wanted to get at in innovation, what I really found is picking your key players is so important. And we all know that we have top talent, and the organization does. What I found is when really trying to drive to innovation, that often another executive would say, here's my top talent, or someone would come forward and be excited about the new innovation milestone at hand. And yet I had to step back and really realize some of the strongest at being able to get you to the 10th to 99th time of having something scale, that ability to scale, may not be the right key player to get and build something for the first time, the second time. So I often would really separate who's that team player that would be the right key player to go from the first to the 9th time, and then hand it off to a different key player to get it to scale, what I call getting it from the 9th time to the 99th time. And so I would really emphasize that, and I'm sure that's true as you work through innovations that come under crisis, or ones that you can plan ahead a little more. I also want to point at some results when you look at the recent quarter announcements that have happened across our different stock exchanges. When I look at some recent stories, you have both DocuSign, which, like many technology companies, as mentioned earlier by Mark and others, have had big results with big 60% year-to-date growth. And we know that they did that they went public a little over a year ago, but really working on their operational scaling. But they also really worked on their pricing and working on adoption across this time period. In addition, Domino's is an interesting one in that, of course, being able to have delivery to go has really worked. But even more importantly, what the results show is Domino's really expanded their food offering. And as they extended to hot wings and different food items, that has really accelerated their revenue growth and as well as their performance. And that innovation and expanding beyond really helped them during a time where not everyone was as nimble at being able to get takeout and get to full food offerings. The next point I wanted to go to is partner. As filled out, I know that a number of us, about 20% of us, showed that partner and M&A is our top strategy. And I know inside of other answers there, partnering is important. And what I think is really key here is, especially during more resource scarcity, a number of our companies, looking at the lineup here, have had severe decreases in cost and in amount of resource. And also risk has shifted and we have some uncertainty ahead. And what partners can really help with is to be able to collaborate by picking a shared goal with a partner or a vendor, and by picking, do we have the same culture and values to get at that? Those two combination of items can really help accelerate growth, and 1 + 1 can really get you 3 with partnering and de-risk in innovation time. 2 companies I want to point out in big results year to date include Etsy, which, if you think about their business model, which has had ups and downs in their 7 years plus in being a public company, yet they do have a completely partner culture. You know, their whole model, of course, is the small business and the in-home producer. And so their model really has come to life during a time where that has been key. And then if you look at Shopify plus some others in the payment processing, the moving over to alternative ways to be able to get your offerings really has had the local business have to change, as we know in e-commerce in a small retailer, and they've been one of the beneficiaries. The other area I wanted to talk about was spoken to by Deryck, and across the day you've seen people looking around the corner, and you're looking around the corner on your business as well. And I think that what I would really say is that we continue to see the headlines in the news, and what we continue to see is we think that this is going to stay longer. We think things that are downside will continue longer. And it was interesting to see Deryck's slide, right, with some of the results showing 70+% of CEOs still saying, I want to go for growth. At the same time, in each of our companies, or in some of our industries, or in some of our boards, people are talking to the risk next to the opportunity. So I think what is a thought I have around looking around the corner comes from my time at Match, the online dating company, with Joe Cohen, our leader out of London, running our European. We worked side by side and came up with the concept, which was launch, listen, learn. And that was looking at more traditional companies, and many of your companies where you're running technology, you have a traditional business, and looking at the list today, where people are used to fully listening and learning before coming up with a launch. So in flipping that around and saying launch, then listen, learn, I think that that is still true in many growth companies or a CEO that's growth. But in many cases where we are looking at headlines saying that we have downside still coming or further downside, I think it's important to go with launch, maybe launch the test, then listen, learn, and then launch the full or larger pilot, then listen, learn, and then go to a full launch. And so I think coming up with alignment around that plan and continuing to be able to be more adaptable, given that ups and downs are still coming and not all is predictable. Some examples looking around the corner would show year to date, both Disney and Netflix have big numbers coming in. We know with the launch of Disney and streaming that they have had many come on. Their pricing will need to change to profitability, but getting early results are good. Yet as the investor analysts are saying, they've got a lot more numbers to come and a way to make it work. At the same time, Netflix has showing great adaptability. They have tons of continued to produce their own content, and that formula is really showing up to work well during a time where studios have some ups and downs. Additionally, Netflix with their streaming, watching, and home has really done well. You might have seen Amazon's now following, which is what happens with innovation. So we'll watch as we go around the corner to see where they each go. And I'm sure we all can bank on that it's going to go well. It's an industry that is doing well. So I wanted to just point out that I'd love to keep the conversation going both today with Digit bringing us all together and now going to a Q&A, but also I'm available to you at Twitter and at LinkedIn. I'd be glad to share my slides if you come at me to LinkedIn or with the Digit team sharing them out. And so with that, I also want to point out some resources that I've pulled from that would be available to you as well. And I'll be continuing in post-AI world and AI thinking in coming months, and we'll look forward to the conversation. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Mark for moderating with all of us, joining you in the Q&A next. Thank you so much.
Elizabeth, thank you very much for that. Again, some very interesting points came out of it. I'm actually going to come to you first. You talked about the fact that a key point in this was expanding, well, it came out of the poll, expanding new markets. Now, if these markets are expanding now, presumably we were there all along. So has lockdown actually just kicked companies out of complacency?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So I hear you on seeing such a big number in expansion. I was a little startled with you, although we are seeing expansion. I do think that that really does show that there are a lot of companies that were poised, but I'm on weekly calls with other boards across the globe and inside of the open source community. And what I've seen is exactly what you're saying. And we see that with the earlier presenters. It really has allowed acceleration of the rollout of technology. If you look at the numbers, things that would have taken longer to roll out, financial services, which has often been the slowest to roll out, you see numbers that they were able to bring their numbers up at a much quicker rate. And it is in many ways unlock expansion. And I think that's key. I think a second point I'd make, which is what we've also seen, is the idea of local has really taken home next to national and global. And so I think that in some businesses where they were focused on expansion and expanding services and product, many have also had to say there's an and here, which is hyper-local has new meaning. And although hyper-local may be in a New York City market or a London market, also out in the country where people are, shifting, still, if you look at a broader sense, I think hyper-local sits next to national and global. Those are some of my thoughts. Thank you, Mark.
What's your thoughts on this, Deryck? Were companies complacent before?
I'm not convinced. I'm not sure they're complacent. I think new opportunities do come up during a crisis. I think I think we've all said the same thing. That it's maximising that risk and opportunity is what some are having to do. I think some are doing it because they're having to take these opportunities to survive. Some are doing it because they genuinely see this as a growth opportunity potential. I mean, a lot of the tech companies are doing fantastically well during this, and then you've got other sectors, such as the sector Stephen's talking about, that are having to look at other things like cost cutting and opportunities in order to actually stay where they are, or maybe just to try and improve and go from where they are. So it depends what sector you're in. I think the opportunities have probably nearly always been there, but it's just actually. I think it's being, as I talk about, being bold, being brave, being innovative enough to actually say, now's the right time to actually take some of these. It's, and I think that's what the good innovative leaders actually do.
Stephen, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think that when businesses are fundamentally challenged from a kind of cash flow balance sheet standpoint, that does require different thinking, and that does sometimes mean that people are going to step back. Naturally, that's a leadership decision. And other times, people will lean into the challenge and then see the opportunity and grab it. So I think it goes both ways. And it really does depend on the sector. Deryck and I, coming from oil and gas, but we'll know the ups and downs over many years of that cyclical nature of that industry. And I think it's about just being in the right place at the right time. And having that positive mindset that actually there is an opportunity here, let's grab it, rather than just try to survive.
It's interesting. I can see all three of you at once at the moment. So as soon as I used the word complacent, Elizabeth smiled, but you pair frowned.
Sorry, say it again, Mark.
I said, when I used the word complacent, Elizabeth smiled, but you pair frowned.
Very good, Deryck.
Yeah, it's. I don't think complacent is probably the right word to use. I think that's why I probably frowned at it. I don't think it's a complacency. I just think it's particularly the sector I'm at the moment. I talk about the public sector and health being very risk adverse. Mark, is what I do, and I think that's probably more of the problem. I think it's the risk appetite at the moment, and Stephen and Elizabeth both put that quite clearly. I think different type of organisations will see this as a different size of opportunity, and I think that's actually doing it. It's interesting that I've only been in the public sector for just less than 2 years, Mark, and don't take this the wrong way, but I'm probably enjoying my time since April more than I enjoyed before there, because it feels very much like a private sector organisation. We're not making decisions by committees. We're not sitting and talking about how much is this going to cost, what's the investment. We're grasping an opportunity and moving forward and actually doing it. And I guess that was maybe what was behind some of my frowning.
Let me add to that, Mark. Pardon me.
No, I was saying you recognise the scenario, Elizabeth.
Oh, yeah. So, I love the face, because I felt that face, which is that's why I smiled, which is we see it as a challenge is to get someone out of complacency, and this crisis really helped. But I also really learned that, and I know I do that side by side with a leader like Deryck, but that is that you do have people that are complacent. You do have people in organizations that we also have to work with or around. And I think that one of the things I learned too is kind of a 3x3 model, which is because often I have to communicate, or my team, I encourage them to communicate 3 times and 3 levels deep, and it has to happen. And so this crisis allowed us, I think, to accelerate. And sometimes we've been able to not always, it came tops down, that we were going to get there faster. At the same time, we may find as this time period extends next year, that idea of having to communicate more than we think we have to and go deeper, saying it 3 times is also really important. Back to you.
Yeah. Well, no, just if I could just say at this stage, we've temporarily lost Stephen because his Wi-Fi has dropped out. But this is Scotland after all. But given time,
I may be back now. I'm not sure.
You're nearly back. Bits of you are back, Stephen. That's good. I'm glad to hear. It was quite interesting at the start of your presentation, Deryck, because I mean you started off with 3 slides essentially, with 4 groups of people, or groups of 4 people on each. The first were 4 female politicians that you described as empathetic, very effective. The second slide was 4 male politicians, all of whom have been described, as strong men. And I'm putting that in very clear inverted commas, because Trump, Bolsonaro, Erdogan, and Putin. Strong is one way of putting it. Deeply erratic is another way of putting it. What do you draw from the comparison between those 2 groups?
Well, for a start, I make no apology for saying I think that the female politicians have been far better in the crisis than the men. Absolutely. I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing they've brought humility, they've understood, they've empathy, they've very much, their message has been about this is what we're in, this is where we are. It's been less about telling people what to do and more about people understanding that this is what it is, this is what the impact is, this is how we come together and get out of this together. And I think that's very much the message that the female leaders have brought and led. They've been very open, they've been very transparent, they've made mistakes when they've made mistakes. They've said they've made mistakes and said we don't get everything right. We're moving on. I think you contrast that with some of the male leaders, and the male leaders, there's someone on that screen that I think have taken this as a political opportunity to actually suppress some of their opposition, some of the free speech, and I think there's a stark contrast. I did say I deliberately left the UK leadership out of it just because I thought it was better to focus on others in case I really upset anyone. But others may differ. I mean, Donald Trump, for example, I think he's a strong businessman. I think he comes from a family with money and he's been successful. I don't doubt that at all. But I think if you look at the way he's handled the crisis compared to the New Zealand Premier, it's been a totally different style. And I think that the ratings show that as well. I think when you have a look at the infection rates and what's happening now in the US compared to what's happening in New Zealand, and New Zealand are still saying they're not ready to open the borders despite the pressure. It's a totally different style of leadership. And I absolutely I don't make any apologies that it's 4 women that I put in the first slide and said they're doing an amazing job, but that's what it is. They've played it absolutely brilliantly, and hats off to them.
Any thoughts on that, Stephen?
I'm not sure I want to get drawn into the politics of it, but I think those leaders are all ambitious, and I think that's something we could probably take from all the styles.
Which leader?
They've got to that point, and I think that's something as leaders in the digital space we all harbour is ambition to go after that opportunity that we've been talking about. I think that's what I would add to that.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yes, really, I took a picture during Deryck's talk of his slide because I'm drawn into a lot of speaking in panels on boards and building diversity into boards. And so Deryck's point, which with Stephen, I'll set aside the politics side and just say from the business side, you'll see that also inside an executive suite and inside the boardroom, inside of teams. And so I think that what we're seeing really, as Deryck gave us that visual, which is a stark contrast can happen. And as he also showed, right, we know that we want really strong men leading side by side with strong and sometimes diverse leaders in their communication and collaboration. We need it all. And that's where a lot of research and writing, you'll see my voice out there with others, is also on the difficulty then to traverse that change, to get that inside your executive suite in the boardroom, and it does take conscious steps. So I think it's very interesting times across the globe, and I think there's a lot of learnings to be able to really take the workplace. And I think our millennials are asking us to change our workplace, both male and female millennials, to get to a more collaborative and more integrated workforce. And so, Mark, I really think it's an interesting time ahead.
How do you change, I mean, never mind within the boardroom, how do you change the perception of the public so that you say, look at these two groups of people? You know, one is touted as being strong, you know, and manly, and the other group is actually really, really effective. Look at the results of what they've actually produced. Why do you not want that rather than that?
I think you need both, Mark.
Yeah. I'll come behind you. Yep. Deryck,
I think you need both. Elizabeth said it, and I think, you know, if you take a combination of both the slides and then you start to understand what your boardroom looks like, what your exec team needs to look like, how you can bring the best of both together. Some of the examples I did put up, Mark, I mean, some of these are extreme. So I did that deliberately. You know, some of these are extreme. I'm not saying we want to have a boardroom that's got, well, I certainly wouldn't want a boardroom that's got, you know, Vladimir Putin in it, although I'm certain he would help get things done quickly, you know, as an example of what I'd be saying. But, you know, I think diversity is a good thing. We need to be embracing it, and we need to be looking at the different traits, the different strengths. I think being a strong, noisy person that, you know, embraces conflict and challenge doesn't always mean that you're the best at getting the job done. And I think the coronavirus conflict has actually shown that you know, the different styles of leadership can actually help you get things done possibly quicker and in a better way than those that have actually, you know, approached it and tackled it head on. I think Merkel's an interesting one, given her scientific background, because she's been both empathetic and open, but she's also, I think, used the data very well and used Germany's manufacturing background to you know, to great effect as well. So I find the whole thing fascinating, to be honest, Mark. I could go on forever.
Yeah, no, exactly. There's a question come in here from Malcolm War from CNI Scotland. I'll put this to you first, Stephen. He says, I think, I'm not sure he's typed this right, and if it is a mistake, my apologies. Partnership doesn't always work. It relies heavily on trust. What is your single tip to make partnering work?
I think you're talking about the success of the partnership there, right? So how do you measure the success of a partnership? That's what you need to think about.
His question, I think, is how do you make it work? How do you make it?
I think on both sides there needs to be a win-win in the partnership, and you need to look at how you measure that win on both sides and make sure there's an adequate return on both sides of the partnership. So in our space, we're in this business-to-business world. We're selling someone else's product some of the time, right? We're selling capacity on an airline. And we're reselling that to other people. So how do we make sure that the rates we agree with airlines are, and the capacity we secure with airlines is a win-win? How do we measure that success? Are we filling it? Are we not filling it? Is there a penalty? How often, you know, what's the quality of the service? So I think that's how you make the partnership work. It's how you measure it. What metrics do you put in place to measure the partnership?
Any thoughts on that, Elizabeth?
I would just really underline, I was thinking, Stephen, as you spoke, how much I agree that it's a win-win. I think of examples. I think of a partnership we were doing at Match, and we really had parts of us on the team that wanted a win-lose. And I know I spoke very strongly that this would mean that the partnership would not last long once all the results came out. And that's what happened. We were able to work it to get it to a win-win again. But we had some really tough meetings in the middle. So I think Stephen's point is one I would underline, which is you really have to have a win-win. And if things change and you meant it to be a win-win, and the rates or the measures shift in some way, like in this virus period, then you really do have to get to a win-win again, or it will not be sustainable. And so I just would underline that means you have to really be monitoring that. I secondly would say, as I spoke earlier, and a lot of you are working on partnerships as showed up in the polls, which is the shared values, checking in not only on the metrics, but also how you're getting there together. I know some things come apart when important values, no one's good or bad, but that there's a lack of a shared value. So if you don't pick out with the shared values at the beginning, I think you have to really shape key values to make sure that you get all the way through. Those are some of my thoughts, Mark.
Okay, Deryck.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one thing just to add is don't focus on the short-term partnerships. The strategic partnerships, the ones that are there that with the long term. Both sides need to invest in that. They're there to help. You need to both make sure that there's value in it for each party. And I would always say, focus on what that long-term partnership's going to get and how it's actually going to help to deliver that purpose I talked about when I did the slide. If it's not a purpose in the partnership, then I'd be challenging to say it's perhaps the wrong partnership or the wrong team.
Mm. What would you say was the difference between partnership and partnering?
Well, partnering may well just be something that you're in. Partnering a lot of times will be shorter term. Partnership will certainly be looking at that longer term strategic place in it. We do a lot of partnering in the NHS, and a lot of that is small strategic things that people will come in actually to help us with a piece of work or to get us across the line with a piece of work. And then we've got some much bigger long-term strategic partnerships that the focus of where we want to go. An example is at the moment we're trying to build these digital clinical hubs so that we can push more people towards getting digital healthcare as part of the balanced mix that we provide. And we've got strategic partners that are very much coming to the table with some of their technology, coming to the table with specialists to try and build on that. So I think there's a big focus between either short term or that longer term strategic roadmap, Mark.
Okay, so forgive me if I'm misrepresenting this, but partnership is like a marriage, partnering is a casual date.
You probably said it better than me there, Mark, but I didn't come on to talk about dates.
No, stick your head in the noose, why not? Elizabeth, whichever it is, partnership or partnering, trust is key to both.
Yeah, definitely is key to both. And I want to underline with what I'm hearing there from Deryck is that partnering, getting to partnerships, also important, given about 20% of this group is directly working on, partnerships or maybe actual to M&A. I think that inside the executive suite and the boardroom, I've been one to really encourage people to walk before you run with partnering, and that is do a commercial contract or do something to partner if it's with an external partner first before you try to go to full partnership, legal contract, joint venture along the way. Really important. And I also think that as all of us are technologists, we have had years of loving to build. And so I think also with my analytics background and my tech background, I think it's also really important to look at, SaaS has made that really obvious, but just to really work with what's already there and then figure out what you can layer on top of it. And now having lived in open source, I'm an even bigger advocate to, of course, build unique IP, of course, build something that's proprietary, but look to what you can build upon. So I think of that, Mark, around partnering to partnership.
Hey, one last question to you, Stephen. Do you see your business at any stage in the future going back to the way things were?
I think for the aviation industry, it's a long road back. I think it's fundamentally changed what the airlines are going to do. We've got some airlines like Norwegian who are, were flying long haul and are now going to fly exclusively regionally within Europe. So all that capacity internationally for us is no longer there. So I think that's just one example of where there's like a fundamental change because some of these airlines are going to make these decisions. I think fundamentally goods still need to get from A to B. And so the capacity will come back in some form in terms of how it comes back. So from I'm trying to make this into kind of a technology response, but I think it is more of a business question because we respond to the business need and what the customer's requirements are. So yeah, I think goods supply chains will come back. They may be in slightly different positions, different places, but I think the aviation sector, we also partner with the express integrators like DHL and FedEx, and their business model hasn't changed a whole lot. They've still been operating their flights, so there's a bit of a shift in the market towards them, and I guess that's them just being not taking advantage but finding the opportunity.
And what about the health sector, Deryck? Because from what you've learned, from what experience has taught you over the last 4 months, do you see going back to the way things were, or do you want it to go back to the way things were?
I don't see it going back, and I don't want it to go back either. I think we've got an opportunity now to push forward with the digital transformation that's needed in the health sector in the UK. I think the way it was going, for me personally, my opinion was it was untenable. I think it was going in a place where we just, there's nothing that we could do to keep up with the demand. Supply wasn't there. The money wasn't there to continue providing the services the way that the demand was there. And to be honest, I think a lot of the population that's wanting to get health services, I think, but particularly the younger population, didn't actually want to do healthcare that we were providing as well. I don't think they wanted to queue up at the door at 8 o'clock to see when could a GP see them. I think they wanted to be seen when it was suitable for them on the technology that they wanted to be seen on. I think they wanted some of that to be automated through wearable technology so that they could get a much more intelligent service from the health service. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to have a health service that caters for everyone, from those that want to consume it from a digital point of view and from those that do want to just have that point of care face to face. And I think this is what we've got. The main thing for us in the health service, Mark, is to make sure that we don't fall back into that position before, because I'm hoping we come out of this, despite being a pandemic, I'm hoping we come out of this stronger and in a much better position to take advantage of that digital transformation.
Presumably there are generic lessons, Elizabeth, irrespective of what type of business you're running, that we can take from the last 4 months.
Yeah, I really think it's true. And I think that when you look at the sectors Stephen's dealing with and Deryck and pointing at it, which is true disruption that has happened. And I know there's been planning coming at it, but it's really shifted. And so I think when you look at financial services, I would also point to a lot of the rules and policies that said you must come inside and physically be there to sign, you must come and get a notary. Those policies actually changed. And so I think to the points that we're hearing, the disruption forced policy and structural changes too, side by side. And so I think that is a learning, though, that says inside of each of our industries, what could be disruption coming, or what should we disrupt to adapt to, as Deryck's pointed to, a millennial or a generation that wants it different from healthcare. That's true of other sectors as well. I would also point out that I don't want to sound too futurist with virtual and AR, but there's a number of industries that are looking at what is a future disruption. And so even if you look at transportation or hospitality, there may be a new normal, of course, but there may be a way to still have those that do the travel, although a lower percent. And that industry has to adapt to have an AR reality where it has an and, where those that are experiencing it deal with those that are not, or haves and haves not. So I really do see innovation is going to be exciting out of, unfortunately, a very sad health situation, but one that can create a really positive new normal.
Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting discussion. Elizabeth, Deryck and Stephen, appreciate your time. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Really great, Digit. Thank you, and good to be with you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, nice to have you. I'd just like to give a big thank you to all of our speakers today. They have ranged right across the board, and some very interesting points come out of the entire day. Thank you also to our conference partners, our exhibitors and our sponsors. The exhibition zone, the virtual exhibition zone, will remain open until 5 o'clock. There is no drinks reception. If you want a drinks reception, you'll have to organise it yourself at home. Please do visit the exhibition stands and meet the sponsors. There's still a chance to win those competitions and prizes. If you have the chance, please take it. It only takes about 2 minutes. Fill out the conference survey and give us your feedback. This is only the second virtual conference that Digit has done, so we're very much keen to get your feedback. If we can improve it, we'll be happy to improve it. On-demand content of today's sessions will be available shortly. I'd also like to thank CISO, the platform providers today, who've done an excellent job on the whole. It is not easy, it's not straightforward, but it's getting slicker all the time, and we're very keen on pushing that. Digit's next virtual conferences are Intelligent Automation on the 27th of August, FinTech on the 29th of September, Digital Transformation on the 28th of October. And I'll just emphasize again, these are all virtual conferences, free to you. And thank you also for taking the time to log on and attend this virtual conference. I'm Mark Stephen. Thank you very much for your patience. And I can't wish you a safe journey home because you're there already. But thanks for turning up. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.